Sion, investor at Multicoin Capital.
Hey. All right, so we have a super distinguished panel here, so I'm not going to waste any time. We'll get started with intros, and we'll jump right in. Really glad to be here. I'm Sion. I'm on the investment team at Multicoin Capital. I spend a lot of time working on consumer products. If you're building anything at the application layer, please talk to me. I want to work with you. But yeah, we can just sort of go around and feel free to give a quick intro, and we'll jump right in.
Great. I'm Dan Schmerin. I'm the co-founder and president of Metaversal. We're an NFT-focused business that is acquiring and producing Web3 native IP.
I'm Dorian Lee. I'm the CFO at Metaplex Studios, and Metaplex is the core infrastructure layer for NFTs on Solana, and we are the largest NFT minting platform on any chain.
Hi guys, Joe Dahl. I'm general counsel at Magic Eden. We are an NFT platform where people can go and buy, sell NFTs, get their socials, all sorts of fun stuff.
Hey, my name is Nick Emmons. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Upshot, and we build a lot of financial infrastructure for NFTs. So built on top of a kind of novel valuation engine we build things around lending, market making, spot markets for NFTs, stuff like that. So.
Awesome, cool. So I think, so the topic of this panel is what's next for NFTs. I think a good place to start is just sort of a review of like where things are today. So I guess how would you guys sort of summarize where we are in the adoption cycle, who's excited about NFTs, who's on both the kind of the supply side and the demand side? Sort of as a bonus to that, is there a moment in the last year, 18 months that stands out to you as sort of like emblematic for where things are in the adoption cycle? So just quick state of the nation review, anything you guys want to add on that?
So I think that Reddit's actions and Starbucks adoption were two big moments for me in the last year that indicate we are approaching the first inning. I keep telling my brother we're still in batting practice, and I still think that's true. And just look at the absolute number of wallets that exist. It's just over the size of Missouri globally. So it's very early. And yet, I think we're seeing more and more big brands that are beginning to approach the space, which is accretive. And I think 2023 is a year where you begin to see more tangible utility. And that's how we begin to break into the masses. Because to this point, when you ask most folks about NFTs, they recite what they've read. And they think it's, just pictures of monkeys and apes or other animals. We're talking talking about backstage that have no resonance to their life. You begin to provide some bearings to their day-to-day activities, and now they'll have that aha moment. And we can talk about what Lowe's is beginning to do, the Home Depot competitor, for using NFTs to track and prevent some of the rampant fraud and theft that exists.
Yeah, it's extremely early for NFTs, and I would echo the thought that it's really not even the first inning yet. And when I think of NFTs, they're really just infrastructure for all types of digital goods. And what we currently think of as NFTs are extremely primitive, right? They're really, really early in terms of what NFTs could be. And as our lives go more and more digital, it makes a lot of sense that the kind of fundamental human drives of acquiring things, owning things, collecting things will all be expressed digitally as well as on top of physical goods. And so some key moments that stand out, in 2021, the August mania in NFTs, that's some of the most intense things I've ever experienced. And I think that really goes to show the amount of fervor that exists for NFTs. Within a very small audience. And it felt like people generally kind of knew each other, right? It was kind of a small tight-knit circle, and probably could compare that to the 90s with Usenet or some of these very early applications of the internet, where it also felt like a very tight community, where people knew each other or kind of knew of each other, and they were still experimenting and playing around with what NFTs could be. And I think it's going to really expand into just all different types of digital goods and assets that we'll use, for, right? PFPs are kind of the first wave of that. And I think PFPs are often dismissed, but I think they're very interesting because they're really a form of digital identity. And they become these digital avatars for people to represent themselves in digital spaces and in the metaverse. But I think it's going to keep expanding into all sorts of more tangible use cases, kind of more in the utility direction. But I think there'll also be many types of NFTs that are simply owned without any utility. They're simply owned because people like them. And I think there's still this mental barrier that has to be crossed because people own physical stuff just because they like them, right? And so I think it'll be the same for digital goods and NFTs as well.
Yeah, I definitely reiterate all those points. I mean, it's definitely early. My moment was People selling a $69 million NFT. I was like, wow, we made it. I mean, that's huge. That's totally insane. And you see sort of like the cultural zeitgeist shifting to really embrace NFTs as this, artistic cultural expression that captures this special thing that makes us human, right? Which is cool, because it's kind of like what cat pictures did with email, right? So PFPs, I think, have a very important place in sort of this adoption of crypto, generally speaking. And it's just such a great primitive. I mean, if we think about like our tangible, real-world, touchable life, most things are unique, right? They're not fungible. So I think that we're going to see sort of the size of the NFT market be, massively larger than the potential fungible market. So pretty excited for the future.
Yeah, I guess I'm just adding on to everything you guys said. We're still early, yada, yada, yada. It's like over the past year and a half, we moved a little bit too close to the end of the grift spectrum. NFTs, PFPs, et cetera, as a theme became very grifty. Everyone wanted to be involved in them. Everyone was just trying to make a buck. And so what we'll see as a result going forward, and we've already seen a lot of this happen, is 95+% of the NFT market fall off. Most PFPs, most of these NFT JPEG projects that have launched that don't have these core communities native to the space, I think is an important thing for kind of identifying and predicting longevity, will fall off. And what we'll start to see is NFTs as a sort of data structure, as this incredibly expressive standard by which we can bring essentially any object onto the blockchain into this highly composable, permissionless environment for right now largely like financial primitives start to merge with the broader DeFi space. So we're starting to see this with NFT perps, NFT lending volume picking up, NFT AMMs. There's sort of rampant experimentation and innovation going on in the financial applications of NFTs, and I think that's going to be a leading theme in the kind of months and years to come as NFTs move beyond just PFPs and grifty JPEG projects.
Super helpful. I think one interesting direction to take this is sort of, I think maybe the two most commonly associated terms with NFTs are community and utility. Maybe there's a few others, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on like why people get involved with these things in the first place. But just hanging on community and utility for now, like what do these words mean to you guys? Is it real? Is it cope and bag holding? Like how do you define? And there's some sense of like realness to it, right? Like you look at the nouns community, you look at punks. They're very different types of communities, but they exist, and they sort of have their own forms of utility as well. So how do you view that lens of application for these sorts of assets, and how do you weigh their merits?
So I think we're on the cusp of a movement to greater individualization. And I keep talking about in terms of micro-personalization. So the idea that you're forming these small niche communities around specific ideas, specific narratives, specific benefits shouldn't surprise us. That's been true throughout the arc of history. It's just expressing itself now in a different way, and I think it's going to be much more targeted than it has in the past. And so identifying what his specific areas of interest are that haven't been part of his digital identity heretofore is what excites me. So I think the community aspect is very real, but you have to differentiate when you're talking about utility for CryptoPunks. What is the utility? Do you have...
you get some jewelry sometimes.
But often you have to pay for it, so it's not free utility. You have a group of OG holders that you can interact with, and that may get you knowledge that you weren't able to access before. But Dorian's point, there are certain projects where it's no different than a piece of art that's hanging on the wall. It's just something that you have an affinity for, and you shouldn't expect that it's going to have utility.
So I think of utility being kind of the superset, and community is one form of utility. And so utility really just means, what will this NFT do for me, right? Like, what benefit am I getting from holding this NFT and owning it? And often in the space, utility has become a meme where people are wanting airdrops, or they're wanting more NFTs, or they're wanting kind of some kind of benefit, whether it's entrance to a party or something like that. But really, without any of those things, NFTs have other forms of intrinsic utility, like community, where it could be kind of an entrance ticket to being part of something that's maybe more like a country club, or a fraternity or sorority, or just a group of people, right, like a club, that share similar interests. And I think something that's really interesting that I've observed in different NFT communities is that different types of people are drawn towards different communities. And so even if it's just a picture of a monkey or a cat or something like that, like, there's very subtle distinctions in those, and certain types of people are definitely attracted to different ones. And I think it's a mix of perhaps like the art itself and what the community represents, and just like what they've seen in terms of the vibe of that community. But when you enter into these spaces, they all have their own vibe, right? Like, just as you would expect different fraternities would have a different vibe, or different country clubs would have a different vibe, all these NFT communities also have their own kind of culture. And I think that's pretty unique, because it's a way of people finding their digital space and connecting with others through these mediums. And so I think it's, to echo my point earlier, it's still very early, and so many more forms of utility are yet to be discovered. And so we're just like at the very base of that curve. And I think there's going to be an explosion of creativity and exploration over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with everyone's thoughts so far. And I think that social signaling by itself is enough utility, frankly. I mean, right, why does someone wear one watch versus something else? I mean, that's it. We're social creatures. We thrive in communities. I mean, de Tocqueville famously says our association is what makes this country special, right? Take that concept and make it globally distributed and accessible by anyone. That's a pretty powerful thing. And that, I think, community allows for, you don't need to worry about push marketing anymore, right? I mean, your community is inherently going to buy, if you're a Bored Ape, right, and you can buy Bored Ape burgers, right, at the shop they have in LA, wherever it is, you're going to go there, right? Because your community's there, so you can build these products using these brands. And what we've seen, which is really interesting, and I keep going back to the apes because it's just so apparent, like the big name, I guess. But there's like, we did some research, and I think there's like 50 plus small businesses that are using apes as part of their IP and their licensing. That's super exciting. Guess who's buying from them? Other apes, right? So you have this self-fulfilling kind of ecosystem developing around a community, which drives tangible economic value, which is like really cool because it captures a brand, it enforces the brand as it succeeds, it kind of gets the snowball effect going. So yeah, it's a cool concept.
Yeah, I agree with the points that community is the core utility right now. I don't think anyone has like really executed on stapling on some explicit form of utility to, especially PFPs, which I think is the majority of what we're talking about here. There hasn't been utility that is really compelling. These are interesting experiments in community building and signaling your interests and signaling the social groups that you enjoy being a part of. And if anything, the utility is the appreciation. The utility is we're making money by being able to identify themes and trends that are relevant or of interest to broader communities. And the assets that we're doing that with, this experiment in sort of community-centric artifacts, or these artifacts that are community-centric rather, are natively financial. And so the communities that we're choosing, the tastes that we're sort of tying to our identities provides direct financial return. It is that appreciation that is the core utility today in NFTs.
Yeah, I think, I remember when sort of Top Shot's was a thing like early 21, and I started really paying attention to NFTs as sort of an asset class at that point. And then the PFP wave sort of came right after that, right? And so when you think about like the types of NFTs that have quote unquote product market fit, I think profile pictures, just status objects, is definitely one. Digital collectibles to a certain extent as well. But I think if you look today at, or even just sort of the last talk, right, like the design space for things like Disco and Galaxy and Lens, NFTs are a much broader thing today, and people are working on sort of game assets, creator monetization tokens, music NFTs, loyalty points, and things of that sort. I'm curious, like, how do you see that map kind of playing out over the next 12 to 18 months? Which of these sorts of ideas have legs? Which ones are executing better than others? How do you see the landscape? There's no world in which it's just monkey JPEGs forever, right? And so, I guess, how do we start breaking out of that into these other assets? And who do you think's leading the charge there?
Thank you. I think gaming is a really interesting sector to follow over the next 12 months or so. I think there are ways to more directly tie utility to game assets represented as NFTs. I think there's some interesting big brand work going on in sort of the loyalty space. I think the jury is still out on the viability of that, and a lot of it comes down to the details of how they execute on it, if they're going to do it in a kind of crypto native way where these loyalty points can be used in the broader crypto space, for example, being used as collateral in some DeFi loans, or to kind of support secondary markets around these loyalty points in kind of DeFi ecosystem. So the jury is out on whether that will succeed, but I think as a general theme that will progress and capture the kind of core of the thinking and the experimentation and focus over the next 12 months is this, like, the financialization foundation that is being laid right now, because that's why NFTs are interesting. They are just a representation as they are in some off-chain database. But what makes them interesting is that they're being brought into such a composable, permissionless environment that is the blockchain. And so if we have interesting vehicles by which we can interact with them in more expressive and more financially native ways, then the NFT narrative becomes a much more compelling one. Now loyalty points have a secondary market. Now gaming items have lending markets for them to allow gamers to unlock additional value from them actually playing games, stuff like that. So I think that's what we'll see over the next 12 months.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, gaming seems like the kind of the front and center obvious type thing, because there's a lot of folks building games. So the products will be there, and they're going to provide, NFTs as assets in these games. So it looks like that's where things are going. I think the Reddit thing's very cool too. Like, communities getting their own, types of digital tokens, which is still a PFP thing, right? But more like targeted, I think, versus just sort of broad blasting, trying to get adoption of your PFP versus someone else's, right? So more like community focus or specific type PFPs, I think, might have a nice little run.
Yeah, gaming is super interesting. Gaming is an obvious one, and I think the main thing that has held gaming back is simply that it takes a really long time to make a good game, and it takes a tremendous amount of budget and talent to build a credible game. And so, we're still in that cycle of those games being built, but, I think that is definitely going to happen. I think all sorts of kind of assets or records that exist should be NFTs, right? So if you think about things like tickets for concerts, so like this is one that's near and dear to me because I love going to shows, and NFTs actually solve a lot of problems around tickets because, right, like there's a lot of scalping around tickets where like a band might want to keep their tickets at a certain price so they feel accessible and they don't get accused of gouging their fans. But then what happens is the instant they go on sale, right, if they're undervalued, then scalpers will buy those and then resell them for a higher price, and none of that value goes back to the creator. And so through NFTs, through royalties, kind of that upside can still be captured by the artist, or through things that we've been creating, like the Metaplex programmable NFTs. A creator could actually create an NFT ticket that cannot be sold above a certain price. right? So you kind of have a ceiling to kind of ensure that like there's not kind of excess profits being made. Or if you look at things like COVID vaccine cards, right? I mean, they're literally giving us a piece of paper that is written with a pen that could easily be lost, could be forged. Things like that, I think is a no-brainer. But the hurdle around a lot of these things, whether it's tickets or records or deeds, the hurdle is more on the physical side, right? Like it's actually pretty easy for us to spin up that infrastructure, but what's the hard part is like getting the NFT tickets scanned at the venue, or getting those COVID vaccine cards authenticated when you're trying to enter something, or you're at the doctor, and obviously with deeds, you're dealing with a lot of like state and government agencies that are very slow to adopt new technologies. But I think it's inevitable that all these things should be NFTs. And so I think it's going to gradually happen over time.
California's DMV has announced recently that they're starting to use NFTs for vehicles, vehicle transfers. So you're right, it's starting, it's happening. And that was only because there's an executive order from Governor Newsom that he wants the agencies to start exploring it. And NFTs are going to solve so many problems. Think about the federal government and how we screw up veterans' records. It's woeful. And yet NFTs could directly address so many of the problems that the National Archives and Records Agency deal with. Think about the Library of Congress, number of issues that they have for millions and millions of records. NFTs will solve those issues. So when you think about the regulatory impact, that's something that we're spending a lot of time on, both with respect to trademark, copyright, IP issues generally. I think folks have glossed over the fact that you have a copyright system, and you're starting to see those cases now come to a head, right? Meta Birkins was an example from the last week, where think about the creative input that went into making those NFTs. Would they have sold if the word Birkin had not been incorporated? That's really the question in my mind, because he's free to make whatever designs, drawings he wishes. But he was infringing on part of Hermes' legacy. And of course the big brands are going to come after that. On the other side, we have a system in place that is cobbled together over the last 50 plus years that really doesn't speak to independent creators at all. And so there is a great opportunity to revisit a lot of that. What do I think is coming in the next 12 months? I think we're going to see a lot more generative art and AI-infused art, which we're excited about. Artists like Sophia Crespo, who we were very early to support, I think will continue to shine. And you'll see the proliferation of other platforms like FX Hash on Tezos, which it's interesting that California's DMV is using Tezos. I think that was a surprise. So I think we continue to see innovation around some of the areas that are already out there, but we're much less focused on PFP projects. I think that they've had a great heyday. We will continue to see others come out, but there's only so many variations of a cool cat, cool rabbit, cool dog that can interest disparate communities. The more interesting part to us is loyalty, membership, access, exclusivity. So thinking about sports teams, concerts, restaurants, airlines, automobiles that you want to buy, right? You want to buy that new Tesla Cybertruck? I could see you cruising around in that. Right now you give them a deposit and you get a number. And there's no way for us to actually find each other or interact in a dynamic marketplace, because it's one-to-one, you to Tesla, or me to Delta, or him to Best Buy. Best Buy has 100 million reward members. It's 1/3 the US population. When's the last time you got something useful from the Best Buy rewards program? You're probably a Best Buy rewards member. You don't even remember that. That's all going to change. It's coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's super wide surface area there for kind of new things to happen. I think one question that I find myself, we ask ourselves pretty often is, what percentage of net new users are going to come from, like, who's going to drive adoption for all these things? Is it sort of the internal sort of crypto world itself, or is it sort of bottom up, or is it top down effectively, right? I remember when Loot came out, and I ran into my investment committee like, this is going to be the next thing, right? And you look back on it, and it's like, all right, maybe game IP doesn't work in that sort of unstructured a fashion, but you look at the sort of stuff that Shibuya is doing today, or you look at Nouns, and you're like, yeah, that core idea has legs, right? So, and that's an example of something bottom up. At the same time, I could have also looked at like Artifact and Nike and like all that stuff, right? And that's brought in an entirely different set of users, right? Who are, as meaningfully engaged as the first set. And so, as you sort of look at all of the things that are going to happen, how do you separate like bottom up crypto native adoption versus top down large brand IP holder consumer application, DraftKings, Instagram, Ticketmaster, whatever, right? Like, what's more exciting to you? How do you sort of navigate that divide just internally?
I think it's bottom up. I don't think it's even a debate, frankly. I think this is a new medium of representing objects in a new environment, and that is going to be propelled via the natives, but via the missionaries, not the mercenaries that are approaching this from a top-down approach, saying NFTs are the new thing, let's try to staple on everything we can into NFTs. Most of the stuff these large brands are doing doesn't make sense as an NFT, or they're not executing it in a way that makes sense as an NFT. To tokenize some loyalty point and to not allow it to be transferable or allow it to interact with the broader crypto ecosystem is useless. It's just a less efficient medium for propelling that. But the crypto native community is what is going to fully capture the nuance of this asset, of this data structure, and allow it to expand into fields that the big brands are not going to explore. They're too risk averse, they're not creative enough, and some of that isn't their fault. Some of it's just based in their sort of established interests and where they're making money today. But it is very much a bottom-up approach. And I think the crypto natives value this bottom-up approach, and they're the ones that have been pushing NFTs today. You can see this with Sotheby's and Christie's and these large traditional auction houses trying to speak the NFT language, and largely falling flat. There's been a few hits, but it's been largely misses in that front because they don't understand the medium to the degree that the community that is where it's originated, that is proliferating it, or that is helping push it forward, does understand it. So I think it's bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with the community part of it. Big brands don't get it. I mean, it's just so early in the adoption curve that it's hard to. Which is kind of our je ne sais quoi, right? We are all community people at Magic Eden, so we have large brands that want to do launches, and we mostly sell them out because we know how to get them into the community. That's kind of our special sauce in a lot of ways. So I think that's totally right. These big brands they see the opportunity, but it's really hard to execute on penetrating into the actual community, getting real organic adoption. It's quite tough. I think that I'm curious about what type of users, new users look like. You'll have some users who are Reddit people who got airdropped an NFT, and that's a user, right? But are they going to go down the rabbit hole, right? Are they going to start buying PFPs? Are they going to start doing more things? Or are they going to hold their NFT and, they're done with it? So I think that there's an opportunity for a top-down sort of mass adoption. Maybe people learn about self-custody through that. That helps onboard people, which is a huge friction point. But also, I mean, really, it's bottom up at the end of the day. You need people who are actually who love this stuff, who are passionate about it, who are the early adopters, who are driving the adoption, building the things to really get, building experiences to reduce friction, to bring these people on. And I think that, I think they probably converge in the middle, but it's a lot more work from the folks from the bottom to move it up than it is for the folks at the top to come down.
Yeah, until now, it's been almost completely driven by the crypto natives. And even when you look at different projects that were launched by more kind of non-crypto mainstream creators or brands, often the people buying those NFTs were also crypto natives who were just attracted to the name or maybe buying it out of a sense of speculation. And so I think it's still very early for mainstream adoption in the sense that a lot of the infrastructure is still very difficult for people to use. And so when you think about the need to kind of have your wallet and manage a seed phrase and also, be able to avoid fraud, it's actually pretty difficult. And, there's kind of a, it's kind of a joke across the space that Bored Ape holders always get hacked or they get robbed of their Bored Apes. And part of that is because, it's a high value target. But another reason is because a lot of Bored Apes actually, community members weren't as crypto native as other NFT communities because for various reasons, like a lot of Bored Apes came from sneaker flipping communities or Top Shot. And so they weren't as well versed in some of these crypto hygiene practices to avoid clicking on weird links and approving weird transactions. And so clearly, if it's that easy to get hacked, it's not ready for the mainstream, right? And it's definitely not ready to have your car title in your wallet or your home title in your wallet. But I think all these things are being built, and there's some interesting approaches that I've seen across the ecosystem. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more innovation around this, where there's kind of a greater degree of abstraction, where all of the blockchain stuff really is in the background and is powering it. But for the average user, the user experience is not that different from just the standard app. And all of that is abstracted away.
Yeah, so said differently, the UX UI today is shit. And until that gets fixed, and it will, you're going to have muted adoption because most people aren't interested, just like they weren't interested in the early phases of our cellular devices until you had the iPhone, which made it simple with one click. So, the challenge is it's not just the crypto visitors who happen to own Bored Apes who have issues. Kevin Rose was hacked a month ago. He's been deep in the space and knows just about as much as most others. So until you have ease and simplification and improved infrastructure at every interval, we'll continue to experience those growing pains because that's what it means to be in batting practice. You are taking swings and occasionally the pitch hits you.
Yeah, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on infrastructure here because, I think universally everyone can agree that key generation, on-ramps, signing, these are all scary things, even to people who are in crypto. I do think there's a lot of things changing, and I'm curious to get Nick's thoughts on this. So we've seen sort of marketplace wars a lot, right? And sort of people have views around whether horizontal marketplaces are going to exist or not, and whether they're going to verticalize over time. We've heard a lot about financialization in particular, right? NFT indexes, futures, borrow lend, fractionalization. These are all sort of pieces of infrastructure that support utility and kind of let people do things. What's exciting outside? Let's assume that all the UX things are solved, right? What other pieces of infrastructure are interesting to you guys, and how does that inform the products that you're building? And sort of, what direction do you see this infrastructure going in?
You want me to start again? Okay. I don't think it's any surprise or secret. I think it's this intersection of DeFi and NFTs that's emerging, and the infrastructure that's going to be built there and that is being built there is going to unlock the most value in the near term. I think DeFi and NFTs have emerged as fairly inarguably the two core pillars of the crypto space. DeFi, the innovation being this permissionless composable environment by which we can build sort of tightly scoped financial primitives and combine them in arbitrarily complex ways to create more expressive financial primitives. The downside being that we're limited to a fairly small number of assets and performing these feats of financial innovation. And NFTs' main innovation is structural, as we've talked about. They can represent anything on chain. They allow us to represent PFPs and generative art, obviously, but allow us to represent any type of esoteric financial instrument, anything we'd like, essentially. And the problem there is their illiquidity, and it's been difficult for these two pillars to interact, for this intersection to be formed, because NFTs have been so illiquid, the infrastructure is lagging, et cetera. But as as NFTs become more compatible with DeFi via new DeFi X NFT primitives, via new experimentation in the kind of space of NFT financialization, we'll see this third pillar start to emerge, this third category that eclipses both DeFi and NFTs on their own. So it's the lending, it's automated market makers for NFTs, it's indexes, it's the same primitives that allowed DeFi to explode and grow to the level that it has, but in a much larger sense with a much more expressive, diverse set of assets that are NFTs essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think like on the infrastructure side, I've always been a little confused about like typical ETH or Solana-based NFTs because the NFT itself is a token, right? But it calls to a database, and that's where the image is, right? Those are two separate and distinct things, which creates issues. Famously, the Ryder Ripps case, right? He created a different NFT that called to the same database, right? Are those different things or the same things? And I think that's if UX UI is solved, that's an infrastructure piece that we need to kind of figure out. Which is kind of why I'm interested in the ordinals. That's kind of a new Bitcoin thing, but they basically tattoo whatever it is onto the Satoshi. It's with it. It's not a separate two-jump thing. So it's super early, but I'm interested to see how that infrastructure piece kind of gets worked out.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that are still missing, right? Obviously, easier on-ramps and all of that. We already talked about that. I think another key piece of NFT infra that's missing is discovery. And so it's actually still pretty hard for people to find an NFT that they really like, right? And so most NFT discovery today happens through word of mouth or through Twitter or just someone shilling it to you. But I think in the future, if we transition from an environment where today still a lot of NFTs are held for speculative purposes, and we shift from that into something where people are just buying to own, right? Buying stuff because they like them or because they want to use them, right? So it's like buy to flip to buy to own. I think for that to happen, there needs to be a lot more infrastructure around discovery that allows people to find things that they intrinsically like. And the more someone intrinsically likes something, the more they're likely to hold on to it for a long time. Shayon, you asked about marketplaces, and I know we've had some discussions around kind of vertical marketplaces versus kind of all-in-one marketplaces. And so today you have the major NFT marketplaces like Magic Eden or OpenSea that is kind of an all-in-one place where you can transact all types of NFTs. I think that will continue to be the case for a while. I think in the future, when you have types of NFTs that are radically different from each other, it starts to make more sense to have specialized marketplaces that kind of are customized for whatever those user needs are. But I think we're not there yet because most NFTs are still fairly similar to each other. But in the future, even the term NFT probably will go away because I think it's a bit similar to the word crypto, right, where it kind of became a bad word. And if you ask the average person on the street what they think of NFTs, they think they're idiotic. They think they're monkey pictures, and they just have these preconceived notions about it. And just as crypto was brilliantly rebranded to Web3, I think there probably will be a rebranding of NFTs, either as an umbrella term or more likely probably there will be just different terms for different types of NFTs. And NFTs are just a way of representing those assets on chain. And each type of NFT will be kind of almost totally disparate things with kind of disparate infrastructure and disparate customer segments.
We don't talk about MP3s to each other, right? So it's the underlying technology. And it happens to be new, so we refer to it that way, but I think it's 100% right. We're also really interested in all the existing Web 2 infrastructure that you'll need in Web 3. So we know lots of people that are now reconciling tax issues, like they just woke up and are facing tax issues. You didn't just wake up and face tax. You've always had tax issues. You just didn't know that they applied in this way. And there's challenges around portfolio. So we often talk at the individual level, like how do you manage your personal wallet? but start thinking about it at a portfolio level. Portfolio management, portfolio valuation, and appraisal. Appraisal isn't what I think or what he thinks. It's something that needs to be certified by the IRS and by insurance companies and the AAA. Like, there's associations that do this. So you're going to have businesses that pop up specializing in catering to all of this. And we're just now seeing the roots of that. Those are the unsexy heroes because they become the cash cows, toll booths. And we're incubating some of those businesses right now.
Cool. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface here. I feel like I could talk for another few hours, but I think we're at time. So thank you so much for making the time here. Thank you.